Welcome back to the second half of our podcast. And we're here today with Professor Nic, who is going to talk to us about some wine tasting and teach us a little bit more about how we should be tasting wine and how we should be drinking wine.
Thank you. And I'm going to aim to do this for tribologists. So how should tribologists be drinking wine? The answer is pretty much the same as everybody else, but there's a couple of things that we might be able to pick up on that may relate to tribology. So just in general about wine tasting, you can see we got some glasses in front of us. We got 3 glasses, 1, 2, and 3 from left to right. These are 3 different grapes that you can actually see written on you can see what the wines are on the bottles in front of us. But they have certain different characteristics, I hope, that we will get into. But what else do we have in front of us? We've got a glass of water, so this is for refreshing our palates while we're tasting the wine, so we don't get overpowered by the wine components in our mouths. And then this is most important. This is a spit cup. So given that some of us have to drive or work or get to the airport after this, it's good if you spit rather than swallow. Okay. So starting with the one on the left, so pick up the glass. And the first thing you do is you tilt it slightly and look at the white paper underneath it. And then we make an interpretation of the color and the depth of color. And I think what we can see is it has a kind of a ruby color. That's fairly typical, but it's also rather pale in that we can see, we could read a newspaper through it actually. It's really rather pale. There's not a lot of color intensity. Yeah, let's see how it goes. So in terms of intensity, I'd say it's a medium intensity aromas. And then we start to think, what can we actually smell? Any suggestions for what it smells like? Don't say wine.
Sounds like fruity to me.
Fruity.
Yeah.
Yeah, fruity. Any particular fruits?
Red berries, perhaps?
Yes. So red fruits, so like red currant or raspberries. Maybe more red currants than raspberries. Maybe cranberries.
Quite sharp.
Yeah.
It's a bit of vanilla.
Yeah, maybe a touch of vanilla.
So ever so slightly floral as well.
Could be. Okay, let's move on to the palate. So we take a sip and swish it round and spit it out. And yeah, then on to what to look for afterwards. Now, first thing is it's not sweet, so it's a dry wine. Also, having splashed out, you find your mouth is salivating quite a bit, I find.
I swallowed mine, but it's always all salivating.
Wherever it went, once the wine's gone, you should be salivating.
Yeah.
And that's the acidity in the wine. So that's tartaric and citric and malic and lactic acids in there that are stimulating your salivary glands. So you're starting to notice the acidity. So acidity is an important component of all wines, and it should balance the other components like the fruit and the alcohol. Okay, so acidity, I think it probably has rather high acidity. The next thing would be tannins. So take another sip and think how it feels between your tongue and the roof of your mouth. I'm going to take some water, just to sort of reset my mouth. Maybe we should do something you don't normally do, and just compare that with, say, the one on the right. Just, never mind, we'll go through the whole procedure with that, but just while we're talking about the mouthfeel. Now, I think that has more of an effect on the lubrication in the mouth. So we're feeling a dryness, an increase in the friction between the tongue and the palate, basically.
Yeah.
So what's happening is the higher tannins in the one on the right, which is a Cabernet Sauvignon, are interacting with the mucins in your saliva and essentially messing up their ability to lubricate the tongue in the mouth. And so that's why we're getting that effect. And we might as well do the whole set. So the one in the middle, let's see what.
That one seems to remain as well.
Yeah.
It stays there a lot longer, whereas the first one almost.
And what that means is it takes longer for the salivary layer, pellicle as it's called, on the tongue to reform. So the one in the middle, which is a Merlot. It's much less of an effect than the one on the right, so much less in effect than number 3. And that is characteristic of Merlot compared to Cabernet Sauvignon. So these are all single varietal wines. They're just made from one grape variety each. One on the left is Gamay, which is the grape in Beaujolais. That's known for generally having rather low tannins, although this has more than you would get in a Beaujolais Nouveau. If it's a higher quality wine, it's been made in a way that extracts more tannins, but Beaujolais normally doesn't have very much tannin. The Cabernet Sauvignon on the right, this is known to have high tannin content. It's just a characteristic of Cabernet. And the one in the middle, Merlot, is typically medium. So Merlot is basically medium in everything, and that's the trilogical.
These type characteristics independent of where they're grown or where they're from?
It's characteristic of the grape type. So the tannins are in the skin of the grape. And so it depends on things like how long they leave it sitting on the skins as well. So there's a winemaking aspect and there's an intrinsic genetic aspect of the grape. So intrinsically, Gamay has less tannin in the grape skin than Merlot, than Cabernet Sauvignon. But in this case, because we're still picking up some tannins from the Gamay, I would say they used a winemaking technique that extracts more tannin from the grape skin. So it's both genetics and winemaking technique.
But is it always considered to be an unpleasant thing?
No, I mean, I think as a red wine drinker is part of the enjoyment. It's part of the experience of drinking a red wine. Yeah. And there are some, so tannins you usually only find in red wines, but there are some white wines where they deliberately have skin contact to extract some tannin from the skins. Okay. And Viognier is an example where you typically had more skin contact to compensate for the rather low acidity. And then orange wines, which are very trendy in hipster wine bars, orange wines are basically white wines that have been made with a lot of skin contact. So that's why they're deeper in color, because it's extracted any of the color that was in the skins, and also whatever tannin was there. So there's more tannin in orange wines than in white wines. So let's try the second one, but going through the whole procedure. So again, it's pretty pale. So I think not a lot of time, or not a lot of deliberate extraction from this Merlot. Merlots can be a lot darker than this. I'm quite surprised that it's this light, actually.
And does the extraction come from the grape skin contact?
Yeah, and the temperature of fermentation as well. The higher the temperature, the more the extraction.
Very little difference between them, actually.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think we have an atypical. The Beaujolais is fairly typical in color, but the Merlot is very light. Because on the east bank, the right bank of the Bordeaux, you have a lot of pure Merlot. Amarol, for example, often pure Merlot, and then they're much darker.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we smell it. So, getting back to, maybe we compare it. What's changed compared to our number one?
And then it's a lot richer. Like Alan's more coming off.
higher intensity, aroma intensity.
I think I was wanting a little bit less fruit though.
Yeah, less fruity and
Or more earthy.
yeah, more earthy, more sort of forest flora and maybe herbs. What about anything woody? I mean, I'm smelling a bit of cedar, I think,
Yes.
which means it's probably been in more contact with oak, which is used for maturation of wines. I mean, one of you detected some vanilla, the first one,
Yeah.
and that could also be from oak, which you might get in a high quality Beaujolais.
And when you're going through the process of smelling each of these wines, the flavor characteristics that you're picking up, is that just from previous memories, or are you going through like a checklist?
Well, you have to go through a bit of a checklist because if you just smell it, you just think wine. But so you have to think to yourself, is it fruity? I mean, like you did, is it fruity? Is it red fruit? Is it black fruit? Or are there some things like mushroom or leather, or they all come from different parts of the winemaking process. So the fruit is from the grape. The leather or mushroom would come from evolution of those, or aging, if you like, maturation of those flavors over time. So the molecules change over time and they start to smell like other things. I mean, obviously there are no mushrooms or leather in here, and no fruit, no red fruits, but it's a question of what memories do the molecules evoke, or what are they remind us of? And I think I'm getting a bit of the sort of leathery, maybe meaty even, aromas in here, which come from maturation. Maybe more on the palate. I say there's some dark plum in there, some like Victoria plum taste.
The skins are plum.
Getting it more on the palate than in the nose.
Now, to pretending a little bit back at tannins, do you ever, look at the way it runs down the onion glass? Is that a good judge of the kind of the quantity of tannins?
Well, no,
Why?
not tannins. It can tell you a lot of, so the Marangoni effect, as it's called, these tears you get, like getting a lot of tears here, which can mean high alcohol, but you can get full because it can also mean more glycerol, can also mean more sugar, but not in this case because we had a dry wine, or 3 are dry wines. But it could be higher alcohol. We can look at the alcohol afterwards. Yeah, I hardly see any here.
Does that tell you a bit about how it feels in the mouth?
It could do, because the glycerol will also have a mouthfeel effect, which will compensate to some extent for it gives a higher viscosity feeling in the mouth, and that might compensate a bit for the dryness. Again, we're talking about different lubrication regimes here, right? The glycerol contributes to the hydrodynamic component of whatever's going on as you move your tongue. Probably soft DHL, actually, and there's soft surfaces. But the glycerol will definitely contribute to that. The alcohol also contributes to the viscosity. It's more viscous than the water. So yeah, it's a complicated result from all of those different contributions. Now, if we look at the last one, I think if we compare the colors, I think it's definitely darker. Yeah, it's still ruby. They're up to ruby, but it's not a very. I mean, again, for a Cabernet Sauvignon, I would expect it to be a bit more inky than this, but it's definitely darker ruby colored than the other two.
So what are the typical color descriptors when it comes to red wines? Like
Ruby, and then tawny. So as a wine ages, it gets browner. So that's an indication of age usually. And those are the. So garnet is in between. So garnet is what you often see in an aged wine, and then tawny is when it's almost at the end of its life.
And is that the same if you drink a red wine that's probably, for quite a long time?
No, it doesn't. Well, it doesn't usually affect the color as much as the taste and aroma. You get a lot of oxidized flavor notes. A bit like port. It starts to taste more like port. But if it's not port and it's not regarded as a positive thing, so
So you'd always recommend drinking a bottle of wine once you've opened it.
yeah, or blanketing it. So you get these devices that can blanket it with argon, which I use when I'm tasting wines. Anyway, what about the aromas on this one? If you swirl it round, you get a bit more intensity in your aromas, by the way, because you're giving more of a surface area to the wine.
I think that was much more blackberry for me.
Yeah, this black fruit, isn't it?
Very dark.
Yeah. Blackberry, and again black plum, but we didn't get black plum on the nose. We're getting it on the nose in this one.
I think that's my favorite smell so far, all the wines.
It's the strongest, isn't it?
Yeah, more intensity than the other two.
Yeah.
Mm. So I think really intense flavors of black fruit. Blackberries, mainly blueberries, black plum.
Like quite almost like sour almost.
Yeah, so I don't remember where this one's from.
And is this characteristic of a...
It's Australian. So a Cabernet from Europe might have some greener tones in it, like bell peppers. I don't notice that in this, but that's also characteristic of warmer climates that you don't get those green tones. So the high tannins are characteristic, and the dark fruit are characteristic of Cabernet Sauvignon.
And are those green tones, do they come from the acids that are in the bottle?
The green tones are from particular chemical compounds that are in the grape. Yeah. So let's turn to the quality of the wines. There are four aspects, in one way of looking at wine. There are four aspects of quality that we look at. And one is balance. And by balance, we mean the balance between acidity and alcohol and tannins and fruit. And you need to have a balance between all of them for it to be a satisfactory wine. So too much alcohol is not good because it just dominates everything. Too much acidity is sour. Too little acidity is kind of makes it flabby. And then you need the fruit to be present either as the original, what's called the primary fruit from the grapes, or an evolved kind of fruit flavor, maybe the mushrooms or the meat in aged wines. The intensity is a quality, so the more intensity, the better. If there's not much intensity, then there's not much to the wine. And then the last thing is the length, which is how long the flavor remains in your mouth after you've swallowed or spat. So let's evaluate them for, maybe we do length first. So you just count in seconds how long it's staying after you've spat it out or swallowed it.
What's kind of a typical time scale? Because I reckon even after a minute, I still...
Yeah, but the flavor intent, I mean, the acidity stays around. That doesn't count.
You have it about 4 seconds.
Yeah, which is fairly short. It's not a very long finish. So that's 10 seconds is long. So it's between medium and short. which doesn't really get it a point in the length. Yeah. So, okay, so let's do, I'll write this down. So we're saying short to medium for this. Let's try and
So we're looking at just the main flavor.
yeah, the acidity doesn't count because that's sort of cheating, lemon juice. Wouldn't have to be.
What's Lisa?
So interesting. I made that slightly shorter than the first one. But
Really?
perhaps I've got that wrong.
Well, you may salivate at a higher rate.
They're all a bit similar, all of them.
Yeah, Michael, for me it was slightly longer. So I'd say this is medium. All right, on the 3.
About the same for me.
Now I'm confused with the acidity, but that felt like it lasted longer for me.
I think it's a bit longer.
Yeah, slightly longer. Exactly the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
So medium plus.
Mm.
Okay, I think it wasn't 10. It wasn't 10, but it gets yeah. So in terms of balance, so obviously if you haven't done a lot of tasting, you don't really have a long experience at balance. But whether you think the fruit and the acidity and the we hadn't talked about alcohol, but they actually this isn't very high. I think they're probably comparable in alcohol. I may even have chosen them to be comparable.
That one's 13.
And the other one?
9. 12 and a half.
Okay, so they're really not very. There's not much to choose in alcohol. So, so the balance between the acidity and the fruit and the alcohol. What do you think of the 3? So maybe you give me a rating.
I think the first one could taste them more.
Yes, that's another criterion. That's the complexity, and the complexity is another parameter. And I think we discussed that a bit when we were going through the flavors. Some had more flavors than the others. So I think actually that in terms of the complexity, probably the first one and the second one had more complexity than the Cabernet. The Cabernet had more intensity, but the complexity, I thought, in terms of number of flavors was maybe number 1 especially, and number 2, and number 3 less. I think it's pretty much mono fruit.
Yeah, do you think that's to do with basically one flavor overpowering the others in the Cabernet?
Well, yes, it has strong primary flavors from the fruit, but complexity can arise through aging, which we don't really have in any of these wines. So it's okay, but it's not really complex. It's got intensity though, and the Merlot had less intensity. I seem to recall.
And that's the artist.
And the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The first one had more or less intensity.
I think the first one has less intensity than the other.
Hmm. So the intensity increased from 1 to 3.
Yeah.
Good job with your.
And the balance. What's your verdict on the balance?
I think the Merlot is probably what I feel most balanced.
What do you think's dominating in the others?
I don't know if it's the flavors in this one. I don't think they come as through as strong, any of the flavors as strong as I like them to be. In this one, there's dominant kind of fruity flavor, and in this one, there's like dominant kind of fruity flavor, which kind of overpowers everything else.
So if I look at the scores, they all do better in some things than in others. And I think normally we just give everyone a point of the balance, the length, the intensity, and the complexity. And I think they more or less scored 2 of those, or maybe 3 in the case of the Merlot, and 3 in the case of the. So we would call the Beaujolais good, and we would call the other 2 very good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We may be being unfair to the Beaujolais.
Is that what you expected the order to be when you first bought points?
I didn't really know because I selected them in a certain price range, and they were all recommended, so they were all going to be good or very good, but not outstanding at that price, probably.
So which one would be your preference if you were going to take one away from today?
Oh, that's a good question. I like the Beaujolais,
I like the Beaujolais, so I was surprised to see.
even though it has the lowest score. It has the lowest score. Why? Because the intensity wasn't as high as the Cabernet, and the length wasn't as long as it could be. But it's a. Can you pass me that bottle?
Yeah. Definitely a lighter one compared to the other.
So Beaujolais has this bad reputation because of Beaujolais Nouveau, which is like the lowest quality of Beaujolais. And this is a level up. This is a couple of levels up. This is the Beaujolais-Villages, and it's one recommended by the Wine Society. So, and it's described as an ideal bistro wine on the back. But I like it's medium-bodied, but I think it's a good example. The Cabernet, Australian Cabernet, I don't know. It tastes a bit generic to me. And the Merlot I thought was surprisingly good, because I'm not a big Merlot fan, but I thought it did very well. It's from New Zealand. It's from Hawke's Bay, which is actually known for its Merlot, so it's not surprising. It's quite good, I suppose. So yeah, and no big surprises, but anyway, I hope you got some idea of how we do this and a little bit of the tribological implications of what we feel when we put red wine into our mouths.
Yeah. Oh, that's been fantastic. So, Kieran, which one would you choose?
I really took Beaujolais. Yeah.
I'm Merlot. You're Merlot, and I'm the Cabernet. So,
All right, so we know which one you're taking out. Don't be jealous.
so there's just a slight disagreement over the Beaujolais.
Oh, I'm traveling by air, so.
Oh, terrible, terrible. In which case that's resolved as well.
Yeah.
And Professor Nic Spencer, so good to have you here. Thank you so much for everything you've done. I've really enjoyed this afternoon. What a lovely way to spend the afternoon.
I'm glad. Nice to be here.